They say blood is thicker than water, but in the Thornton household, money was the only thing that flowed. Brucey Vance was the adopted daughter they kept in the shadows, a servant in her own home, mocked for loving a man they called a grease monkey mechanic. On the night of the year's most prestigious engagement party, they didn't just break her heart, they threw her out into the freezing rain like garbage. But the Thorntons made a fatal miscalculation. They didn't know that the beat-up truck in the driveway was a disguise, and the man they ridiculed held the power to destroy their entire legacy in a single signature. Watch until the end to see the most brutal karma ever served cold. The crystal chandelier in the foyer of the Thornton estate cost more than Brucey Vance would likely earn in a lifetime, or at least that was what her stepmother, Beatrice Thornton, reminded her of every single morning. "Brucey, if I see a single streak on this marble, you'll be sleeping in the shed tonight." Beatrice's voice shrilled through the cavernous hallway. Brucey wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her knees aching against the cold stone floor. She was 23 years old, a brilliant student who had finished her law degree online at night, yet here she was, scrubbing floors in the home that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Adopted at age 7, after her parents died in a car crash, Brucey had quickly learned that she wasn't brought in to be a daughter. She was brought in to be a tax write-off and an unpaid maid. "I'm finishing it now, Beatrice," Brucey said, quietly dipping the rag back into the soapy water. "That's Mrs. Thornton to you," Beatrice snapped, stepping over Brucey's legs with her Louboutin heels, clicking aggressively. "Tonight is Tiffany's engagement party to Preston Vanderbilt. The entire elite of New York is coming. The CEO of Goldman Sachs might be there. If you embarrass us, Brucey, I swear I will throw you out on the street with nothing but the rags on your back." Brucey kept her head down. She had heard the threat 1,000 times. But tonight was different. Tonight she had finally gathered the courage to invite her boyfriend, Julian. Julian was everything the Thorntons hated. He was quiet, wore flannel shirts stained with motor oil, and drove a rusted 1998 Ford F-150 that sounded like a dying tractor. Beatrice and her biological daughter Tiffany called him the mechanic. They laughed at his dirt-stained fingernails. But Brucey saw something else. She saw the way he listened to her, the way he supported her late-night studying, and the kindness in his deep green eyes. Speaking of embarrassing, a nasally voice floated down the stairs. Tiffany Thornton descended, wearing a custom-made silk gown that shimmered like liquid silver. She looked like a princess, but Brucey knew she had the soul of a viper. "Is it true, Brucey? Did you actually invite that grease monkey to my engagement party?" Brucey stood up, wringing out the cloth. "Julian is my boyfriend, Tiffany, and Beatrice said I could have a +1 if I finished the preparations." Tiffany laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Mum said that to shut you up. Preston and I are celebrating a merger of 2 dynasties. Do you really think we want a man who smells like gasoline eating our caviar? It's pathetic." "He's not pathetic," Brucey said, her voice trembling slightly. "He works hard. He owns his own shop." "A garage," Tiffany sneered. "He fixes tires, Brucey. My Preston manages hedge funds at BlackRock. There are levels to this world, and you and your mechanic are at the bottom." Beatrice checked her diamond-encrusted watch, a Patek Philippe that Brucey knew cost 40,000 $. "Enough chatter. Brucey, get to the kitchen. The caterers from Le Bernardin are arriving, and I need you to supervise the loading dock. And tell your boyfriend to use the service entrance. If he parks that heap of junk in the front driveway, I'll have it towed." Brucey swallowed her pride, as she always did. "Yes, Mrs. Thornton." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding. She pulled out her cracked iPhone and sent a quick text to Julian. Brucey, they are in a mood. Please be careful tonight. Park round back. I love you. Julian, don't worry, Elle. Tonight is going to be memorable. I promise. Love you. Brucey stared at the phone. Julian had been acting strange lately, more intense, more focused. He had told her he was working on a big project at the garage, something that would change things for them. She hoped he hadn't spent his savings on a suit he couldn't afford, just to impress these people. As the sun set, the Thornton estate transformed. Luxury cars began to snake up the long, winding driveway. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and Maybachs lined up like a parade of wealth. The air filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of a string quartet playing Mozart. Brucey had changed into her one decent dress, a simple navy blue cocktail dress she had bought at a thrift store and tailored herself. It fit her perfectly, accentuating her slender frame and striking auburn hair. She looked elegant, far more elegant than her station in the house suggested. She was arranging champagne flutes near the back terrace when she felt a hand grip her arm. It was Tiffany, and she looked furious. "What do you think you're wearing?" Tiffany hissed her eyes, scanning Brucey's dress. "It's just a dress, Tiffany. I stayed out of the way." "It's blue," Tiffany spat. "Preston's mother is wearing blue. You're trying to upstage the mother of the groom, you insolent little stray." Before Brucey could react, Tiffany grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray and deliberately tipped it forward. The dark crimson liquid splashed all over Brucey's chest, soaking the navy fabric and ruining the dress instantly. "Oops," Tiffany smirked, feigning shock. "Looks like you're not fit for polite society. Go change, or better yet, leave." Brucey gasped, the cold wine seeping into her skin. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned to run toward the servants' quarters, but she froze. Julian was walking through the service gate. He wasn't wearing his usual flannel. He was wearing a tuxedo, and not just any tuxedo. Brucey had an eye for tailoring. The fit was impeccable, the fabric midnight black. But his hair was still a bit messy, and his hands, though scrubbed, still showed the faint, rough texture of a man who worked with tools. He saw the wine on her dress immediately. The smile on his face vanished, replaced by a look of cold, terrifying calm. "Brucey," he said, his voice low. "Who did this? It doesn't matter," Brucey whispered, rushing to him and trying to hide the stain with her arms. "Julian, you look amazing. But we have to go. We can't stay here." "We aren't going anywhere," Julian said, gently, taking her hands. He didn't look at the stain. He looked into her eyes. "You live here. This is your home." "It's not my home," she choked out. "I'm just a guest who overstayed her welcome by 15 years. "Well," Julian said, turning his head to look at the crowded terrace where Beatrice and Tiffany were holding court. "That changes tonight." The party was in full swing. The garden was illuminated by thousands of fairy lights. Waiters moved through the crowd offering hors d'oeuvres topped with truffle shavings. Beatrice was in her element, laughing loudly at a joke made by a senator, while Tiffany clung to Preston's arm, flashing her massive diamond ring. Preston Vanderbilt was handsome in a generic way, with slicked-back blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He came from old money, or so the story went. Rumors in the financial district suggested the Vanderbilt fortune wasn't quite as liquid as it used to be, but tonight they were selling the illusion of power perfectly. Brucey and Julian stepped onto the terrace. Brucey had tried to clean the wine stain, but it was still visible, a dark splotch of shame. Julian, however, walked with a strange confidence, his hand firmly on the small of her back. As soon as they entered the main circle, the conversation died. Beatrice spotted them first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. She excused herself from the senator and marched over Tiffany and Preston, trailing behind her, like hyenas sensing a wounded animal. "I thought I told you to use the service entrance," Beatrice hissed, ignoring Julian and glaring at Brucey. "And look at you. You look like a drunkard. Stained clothes at my daughter's engagement. Have you no shame?" "It was an accident," Brucey said softly. "It was clumsy," Tiffany interjected, sipping her champagne. She looked at Julian, looking him up and down with a sneer. And this must be the mechanic. Nice rental grease boy. Did you have to save up all year to rent that tux for 3 hours? Preston chuckled, shaking his head. "Tiff, be nice. The working class likes to play dress-up too. It makes them feel important." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked bored. He reached into his inner pocket. Beatrice flinched as if expecting a weapon, but he only pulled out a pack of cigarettes, cheap ones. He didn't light one, just held the pack. "I'm not here to play dress-up," Julian said, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly over the quiet crowd. "I'm here to support Brucey. And I'm here to ask you a question, Mrs. Thornton." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You ask me a question, you're trespassing. I want you off my property immediately." "Actually," Julian continued, ignoring her dismissal, "I wanted to ask about the trust fund." The colour drained from Beatrice's face, so fast she looked like a corpse. The silence that fell over the group was heavy. "What are you talking about?" Beatrice demanded, her voice rising an octave. "Brucey's adoption papers," Julian said. "I did some reading. Brucey's biological father was an inventor. He held patents for industrial drilling technology used by Exxon and Chevron. When he died, those royalties didn't disappear. They went into a trust managed by her adoptive guardians until her 25th birthday, or until she married." Brucey looked at Julian, stunned. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "My parents were poor." "They weren't poor, Brucey. They were humble," Julian said gently. "There's a difference." Beatrice stepped forward, her finger pointing inches from Julian's face. "You listen to me, you gutter rat. You don't know what you're talking about. I took this girl in out of the kindness of my heart. I clothed her. I fed her. You used her," Julian corrected. "And you've been siphoning money from that trust to fund this lifestyle. The cars, this party, Tiffany's ring." He looked at Preston. "I'm guessing the Vanderbilts know about the money. Is that why the merger is so important? Because the Thornton cash flow is about to dry up when Brucey leaves." Preston's face flushed red. "How dare you? I'll have security throw you out." "You're lying!" Tiffany screamed, losing her composure. "Mother, tell him he's lying." Beatrice was shaking. She realized that guests were listening. The senator was watching. The bankers were whispering. She needed to regain control, and she needed to do it violently. "Get out!" Beatrice screamed, pointing to the gate. "Get out of my house! Both of you, Brucey, you ungrateful wretch! I took you in, and you bring this slanderer into my home to humiliate me." "Beatrice, is it true?" Brucey asked, her voice gaining strength. "Is there a trust?" "There is nothing," Beatrice shrieked. "You have nothing. You are nothing. You are a charity case that went bad. Now get out, grab your trash boyfriend, and leave. If you're not off this property in 2 minutes, I'm calling the police and having you arrested for extortion. You heard her?" Preston said, stepping forward aggressively, trying to look tough in front of the crowd. "Beat it, mechanic. Go back to the garage." Julian looked at Preston, then at Beatrice. He smiled a dry, humorless smile. "Fine," Julian said. "We'll leave." He turned to Brucey. "Come on, Elle. You don't want to be here for what happens next, anyway." "Oh, don't worry." Tiffany laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "What happens next is we drink Dom Perignon and forget you ever existed." "Brucey!" Beatrice shouted as Brucey turned to follow Julian. "If you walk out that gate, don't you dare come back. You are disowned. You are cut off. You are homeless." Brucey paused. She looked at the woman she had called mother for 15 years. She looked at the house she had scrubbed and polished. She looked at the luxury she was never allowed to touch. "Goodbye, Beatrice," Brucey said. She took Julian's hand. They walked down the grand marble steps, past the judging eyes of New York's elite, past the shimmering pool, and down the long driveway. As they reached the heavy iron gates, the clouds that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain began to pour, a cold, torrential downpour. Tiffany's laughter echoed from the terrace. "Look, the rats are getting drowned. Good riddance." Brucey shivered, her wet dress clinging to her. She felt small, defeated, and homeless. They were standing on the side of the road, the mud splashing up onto her legs. "I'm so sorry, Julian." She sobbed, the adrenaline fading. "I ruined everything. She threw me out. I have nowhere to go. I have no money." Julian stopped walking. He turned to her, in the pouring rain water dripping from his hair, ruining the rental tuxedo. But he didn't care. He cupped her face in his hands. "You aren't homeless, Brucey," he said firmly. "I am. You saw her and your truck. We can't live in your truck." Julian looked over her shoulder down the dark road. "I didn't bring the truck tonight." Brucey wiped her eyes. "What?" "I said I didn't bring the truck." Suddenly blinding LED headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek black vehicle rounded the corner. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase jet, black with chrome rims that gleamed even in the rain. It moved silently like a predator and pulled up right beside them. Brucey stared, her mouth slightly open. "Julian, whose car is that?" The driver's door opened. A man in a pristine grey uniform stepped out holding a large umbrella. He walked around the car ignoring the mud and held the umbrella over Brucey and Julian. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," the driver said, his voice crisp and British. "I have the documents you requested from the firm. Cravath, Swain and Moore sent them over via courier an hour ago." Brucey froze. "Mr. Sterling." Julian looked at her, his green eyes softening. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, Brucey. My last name isn't Smith. It's Sterling." "Sterling." Brucey's mind raced. "Like Sterling Automotive, the electric car company, the defense contractors." "My father started the company," Julian said. "I took over as CEO 3 years ago. I like fixing cars in my spare time to stay grounded, and to meet people who like me, for me not my bank account." He gestured to the driver who opened the rear suicide door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was cream leather and walnut wood, warm and inviting. "Get in, Brucey," Julian said. "We have to go back." "Go back?" Brucey asked, bewildered. "Why?" Julian reached into the car and pulled out a thick leather folder handed to him by the driver. "Because," Julian said, his eyes hardening, as he looked back up the driveway toward the mansion where the party was still raging. "I didn't just bring a car, I brought the foreclosure notice on the Thornton estate." Inside the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the reinforced glass. The world outside was a cold, wet blur, but inside the air smelled of rich mahogany and conditioned leather. Brucey sat frozen, her wet dress staining the pristine cream seat, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She stared at Julian, or rather Julian Sterling. The man she had watched fix a radiator with duct tape and a wrench was now adjusting diamond cufflinks on a tuxedo shirt that probably cost more than the Thorntons' annual grocery budget. "Julian," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Sterling, as in Sterling Global. You own the skyscraper downtown, the one that twists like a helix." Julian sighed a heavy, regretful sound. He reached into a refrigerated compartment and pulled out a bottle of water, cracking the seal and handing it to her. "I do. And the one in London. And the shipyard in Singapore. I'm sorry I lied, Brucey. When I met you at the library that day, I was exhausted. Everyone I met wanted a job, a loan, or a connection. You just wanted to know if the seat was taken. You offered me half your sandwich because you thought I looked tired." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You fell in love with a mechanic who drove a rust bucket. That told me everything I needed to know about your heart. I planned to tell you tonight after the party. I was going to propose." Brucey's eyes widened. "Propose? I still am," Julian said firmly. "But first we have some pests to exterminate." He tapped on the partition window. "Arthur, take us to the front door. Right up to the steps. If you have to drive over the red carpet, do it." "With pleasure, sir," the driver replied. The car surged forward. They didn't drive back down the road. They turned around and headed straight back up the winding driveway toward the mansion. Up at the house, the party was reaching a fever pitch. Beatrice Thornton was holding a microphone, standing on a raised platform near the string quartet. She was flushed with wine and victory. "Thank you all for coming," Beatrice announced, her voice booming over the speakers. "Tonight isn't just about Tiffany and Preston. It's about legacy. It's about the joining of two families that represent the very best of dignity and class." "Hear, hear," Preston shouted, raising his glass. "We have worked so hard to maintain the standards of this community," Beatrice continued, "keeping out the riffraff to ensure that our circle remains pure." As if on cue, a blinding pair of xenon headlights swept across the terrace, cutting through the rain and illuminating the crowd like a prison spotlight. The guests gasped and shielded their eyes. The massive black Rolls-Royce Phantom roared up the driveway. It didn't stop at the valet stand. It bypassed the parking attendants, hopped the curb and crushed a row of prize-winning hydrangeas before screeching to a halt directly at the base of the marble stairs, right on top of the red carpet. "What on earth?" Tiffany shrieked, dropping her glass. The guests murmured excitedly. A car like that meant serious power. Was it a head of state? A celebrity, Beatrice squinted into the headlights, her annoyance warring with curiosity. "Who is that Preston? Did you invite the governor?" The driver's door opened. Arthur, the chauffeur, stepped out with an umbrella. He walked around the back with a military cadence, ignoring the rain. He opened the rear door. First a polished black dress shoe stepped onto the red carpet. Then Julian Sterling emerged. He stood to his full height, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look like a mechanic anymore. He looked like a king returning to execute a traitor. He turned and offered his hand into the car. Brucey stepped out. She was still wet, her dress still stained, but with Julian holding her hand and the massive car behind her, she didn't look pathetic. She looked like a survivor. A hush fell over the crowd. It was absolute silence. Beatrice's jaw dropped. You came back." She stormed down the stairs, her face turning a violent shade of purple. "I told you to leave, and you rented a limo. Do you think that impresses me? You drove over my flowers. I'm calling the police right now." Julian didn't shout. He didn't have to. He simply walked up the stairs, pulling Brucey with him. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They walked right up to the platform where Beatrice had been giving her speech. Julian reached out and took the microphone from Beatrice's hand. She was so shocked she let go without a fight. "Good evening, everyone," Julian said. His voice was smooth, deep, and commanded instant authority. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Julian Sterling. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The name Sterling was royalty in financial circles. No, Preston Vanderbilt stammered, stepping forward, his face pale. That's impossible. You're the guy who changes tires at the Quick Fix on 5th. I own the Quick Fix, Julian corrected, looking at Preston with cold amusement. And the block it sits on, and the bank that holds the mortgage on your father's firm, Preston. Preston choked, taking a step back. But I'm not here to talk about my portfolio, Julian said, turning his gaze to Beatrice. I'm here to talk about theft. The atmosphere in the garden shifted instantly from a celebration to a courtroom. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the tension was thick enough to drown in. Beatrice tried to grab the microphone back, but Julian simply held it out of reach. You're drunk, she hissed, though her eyes darted nervously to the guests. Security, get this lunatic off the stage. I wouldn't do that. A deep voice boomed from the crowd. A man in a sharp grey suit stepped forward. It was Senator Reynolds, one of the most powerful men in the state. He was looking at Julian with recognition. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you were in town. We've been trying to get a meeting with your board regarding the new energy grid project. Senator Tour. Julian nodded respectfully. We can discuss the grid later. Right now I need a witness. Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out the leather folder Arthur had given him. He opened it, the papers crisp and dry. Beatrice Thornton. Julian began reading from the document. For 15 years you have played the role of the benevolent guardian. You told everyone that Brucey was a burden, a drain on your finances. She is, Beatrice screeched. She eats my food, uses my electricity. According to these bank records from the Cayman Islands, Julian said, holding up a sheet of paper with complex wire transfer codes, Brucey's biological father left a trust fund totaling $18 million in 2008. Adjusted for interest and market growth, the trust should be worth nearly $32 million today. The crowd gasped. $32 million was a fortune even for this crowd. Lies, Tiffany shouted, stomping her foot. He's making it up. Look at him, he's a fraud. These are certified records from UBS and Credit Suisse. Julian continued ignoring the girl. And here. He pulled out another stack of papers stapled together with a red legal flag. Here is the ledger of withdrawals. He looked at the crowd. In 2018, $2 million withdrawn for home renovations, specifically the pool we are standing next to. In 2020, $400,000 for a educational trip to Paris for Tiffany, not Brucey. In 2023, a wire transfer of $5 million to cover margin calls for Preston Vanderbilt's failing hedge fund. The silence was deafening. Every head turned toward Preston. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. That was a loan, he squeaked. A private investment. It was theft, Julian said coldly. The trust stipulates that funds can only be used for Brucey Vance's welfare. Buying your fiancé out of bad stock bets does not constitute Brucey's welfare. Brucey stood beside Julian, reading the numbers over his shoulder. Her hands covered her mouth. She had spent years scrubbing floors, wearing hand-me-downs, and skipping meals so she wouldn't be a burden. Meanwhile, they were spending her father's legacy on their vanity. You stole it all, Brucey whispered, her voice amplified by the microphone Julian was still holding. My parents worked for that. They saved that for me. We didn't steal it, Beatrice yelled, but her voice was cracking. She looked around for support, but the guests were backing away. The senator had crossed his arms, looking at Beatrice with disgust. You have no proof we knew about the stipulations. Beatrice tried a new angle. It was an administrative error. Was it? Julian flipped to the back of the folder. Because I also have the original adoption agreement. Clause 4, Section B. Guardians acknowledge full fiduciary responsibility for the Vance estate. And right here at the bottom is your signature, Beatrice, and yours, Tiffany, as a witness when you turned 18. Tiffany froze. I just signed what Mom told me to sign. That's not a legal defense. Tiffany Brucey said, her lawyer instincts kicking in. She stepped forward, her eyes burning with a fire Beatrice had never seen before. That makes you an accomplice to grand larceny and fraud. But wait. Julian interrupted his voice, dropping to a dangerous low. The money is one thing. Money can be repaid. But what you did to the house, that is why I am really here. Beatrice's eyes bulged. She actually took a step back, bumping into the string quartet cellist. No, you can't know about that. The mortgage on this estate, Julian announced to the crowd. The Thornton Manor. It hasn't been paid in 6 months. That's a lie, Beatrice screamed. We are liquid. We are wealthy. You were wealthy, Julian corrected, until you drained Brucey's trust to 0 3 months ago. You've been floating checks ever since. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings last week. Julian pulled a single thick document from the back of the folder. It had a red stamp on it. Foreclosure notice. The bank was going to auction this house next Tuesday, Julian said, but I didn't want to wait that long. I called the chairman of the board at the bank about 20 minutes ago. I bought the debt. He handed the paper to Brucey. Brucey holds the deed, Julian said. Technically, as of 10 minutes ago, Sterling Global acquired the distressed asset, and I am transferring full ownership to Brucey Vance, effective immediately. Brucey looked down at the paper. It was real. So, Julian said, looking at Beatrice, whose face had gone grey, you are trespassing, and unlike you, Brucey has a heart. But I don't. Julian turned to the security guards who Beatrice had threatened to call earlier. They were big men hired for the night. They looked confused. Gentlemen, Julian said to the guards, I am hiring you for the remainder of the night. Double your rate, payment in cash right now. The head guard looked at Beatrice, then at the billionaire. He nodded. Yes, sir. Excellent. Julian pointed at Beatrice, Tiffany, and Preston. Please escort these 3 off the property. They are causing a disturbance. You can't do this, Tiffany shrieked, grabbing Preston's arm. Preston, do something, call your father. Preston pulled his arm away from her sharply. Don't touch me, he muttered. If this is true, if you're broke, and you're going to prison. Preston, Tiffany gasped. The engagement is off, Preston said, straightening his jacket and walking quickly toward the exit, keeping his head down to avoid the cameras that some guests had started to pull out. Preston. Tiffany wailed, collapsing onto the wet red carpet. Get them out, Julian ordered the guards. Wait, Beatrice screamed, clinging to the railing of the stairs. You can't kick me out. I have nowhere to go. This is my house. I have clothes in there. My jewelry. Brucey stepped forward. She looked at the woman who had made her sleep in a shed when guests came over. She looked at the woman who had forced her to scrub toilets on Christmas morning. You can take what you're wearing, Brucey said, her voice steady and cold. Just like you told me to do an hour ago. Karma is a mirror, Beatrice, and yours just broke. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream, but the security guards grabbed her by the elbows. As they dragged the screaming woman and her sobbing daughter down the driveway, the guests didn't intervene. In fact, the senator began to clap. Slowly, the applause spread. The bankers, the socialites, the people who had ignored Brucey for years, they were clapping. Not out of kindness, perhaps, but out of respect for the brutal efficiency of the takedown. Brucey didn't watch them leave. She turned to Julian. Her legs felt weak. Is it over? She asked. Not quite. Julian said, his face still serious. We took the house. We exposed the theft. But there is one more secret they were hiding. One that I found in the file that you need to see. It's about your parents' car accident. Brucey's blood ran cold. My parents... It was an accident, wasn't it? Julian hesitated, glancing at the driver, Arthur. Let's go inside. You need dry clothes and you need to sit down for this. The grand oak doors of the Thornton estate closed behind them, shutting out the storm and the chaos of the ruined party. The house was quiet now. The string quartet had packed up, the caterers were hurriedly clearing plates while avoiding eye contact, and the guests had fled like rats from a sinking ship. Brucey stood in the foyer, dripping wet, shivering, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. The marble floor she had scrubbed just hours ago was now muddy with footprints, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the urge to clean it. Arthur, Julian said to the driver who had followed them in, have the staff bring dry clothes to the study, and tea, strong tea. Yes, sir, Arthur replied, vanishing into the corridors. Julian guided Brucey toward the east wing. This was the forbidden territory. Beatrice's private study was located here, a room Brucey had never been allowed to enter. It was where Beatrice managed the estate, or so she claimed. Why are we going in here? Brucey asked, her teeth chattering slightly. Because the answers are in the safe, Julian said. He stopped in front of the heavy mahogany door. And don't worry about the lock. I had my team run a forensic audit on Beatrice's digital footprint earlier today. She uses the same passcode for everything. He punched a code into the keypad, 714. July 14th. Brucey frowned. That's the day she legally adopted you, Julian finished grimly. She considers it the day she won the lottery. The door clicked open. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and expensive leather. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but the desk was a chaotic mess of papers, evidence of Beatrice's frantic attempts to juggle her debts before the party. Julian walked straight to a large painting of a fox hunt on the wall. He swung it aside to reveal a wall safe. He entered the code again. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside there were stacks of cash velvet jewelry boxes and a thick yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. Julian bypassed the cash and the jewels. He took the envelope. Brucey, he said, turning to her. Sit down. Brucey sank into the leather armchair. She felt a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. What is it? Julian broke the seal. He pulled out a police report, old and brittle, and a series of technical schematics blueprints for a mechanical device. Your father Marcus Vance was a genius, Julian began. He invented a hydraulic stabilizer valve. It's a piece of tech used in deep-sea oil drilling. It prevents blowouts. It saves lives. I remember him drawing at the kitchen table. Brucey whispered, a memory surfacing. He worked for Thornton Industries, Julian said. Beatrice's late husband, Charles, was the CEO, but Charles was cutting corners. He wanted to use cheap materials for the valve. Your father refused. He said it would fail under pressure. He threatened to go to the press and the regulatory boards. Julian handed her a letter. It was handwritten by her father, dated 2 days before he died. Charles I cannot, in good conscience, sign off on this. The alloy is too weak. If you proceed, people will die. I am taking my findings to the Safety Commission on Monday. He never made it to Monday, Brucey said, her voice trembling. The crash was on Sunday night. The police report listed the cause of the accident as brake failure due to driver negligence. Julian said, his voice hard. But look at this. He handed her a second document. It was a receipt from a mechanic shop, Thornton Fleet Services. It was dated the Saturday before the crash. Work order, brake line adjustment. They didn't fix the brakes, Brucey, Julian said softly. They sabotaged them. Beatrice's husband ordered the sabotage. And Beatrice, she paid the mechanic to disappear. I found the wire transfer in the Cayman files. $50,000 sent to a man named distinctively Gus Miller the day after your parents' funeral. Brucey felt the room spin. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just stealing her inheritance. They had murdered her parents to protect a faulty product, then adopted her to ensure that the patent rights which legally passed to her would stay under their control until she came of age. They killed them, Brucey whispered. Tears streamed down her face, hot and angry. They killed my mum and dad for a valve, for money. And then they made you their servant. Julian added, his fists clenching. They humiliated you every day to break your spirit so you would never ask questions. They kept you close to watch you to make sure you never found out the truth. Brucey stood up. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, white-hot fury. She looked at the luxury around her, the books, the art, the furniture. All of it bought with blood. Her parents' blood. Where are they? Brucey asked. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was the voice of a prosecutor. Where did Beatrice and Tiffany go? My security team tracked them, Julian said. They are at the Motel 6 on the highway. Beatrice's credit cards have been declined everywhere else. She thinks she's just broke, Brucey said, wiping her face. She thinks this is just about money. She doesn't know we have this file, Julian confirmed. Brucey walked over to the desk. She picked up the phone. What are you doing? Julian asked. I'm ending this, Brucey said. I'm going to make the call. She needs to come back here. I want her to look me in the eye when the handcuffs go on. The rain had stopped, leaving the night silent and heavy with fog. The Thornton estate, usually a beacon of light, was now dark, save for a single light in the study. At the Motel 6, Beatrice Thornton was pacing the small, stain-carpeted room like a caged tiger. Tiffany was sitting on the bed, sobbing into a pillow, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. Stop crying, Beatrice snapped. It's giving me a migraine. We have nothing, Mum, Tiffany wailed. Preston blocked my number. My friends aren't answering. We are in a motel. There are bugs in here. It's temporary, Beatrice insisted, though her hands were shaking as she lit her last cigarette. We just need to regroup. That brat, that ungrateful little brat, tricked us. But I have lawyers. I have connections. You have nothing, Tiffany shot back. Julian Sterling bought the debt. He owns the house. He owns us. Beatrice's phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was the landline from the estate. She froze. It's her. Don't answer it, Tiffany said. I have to, Beatrice said. She took a deep breath, putting on her best, haughty voice. Hello, Brucey. I hope you're calling to apologize. I'm calling to make a deal. Brucey's voice came through cool and detached. Beatrice's eyes lit up. She covered the receiver and whispered to Tiffany, She wants a deal. She's weak. She's scared. What kind of deal? Beatrice asked into the phone. I've been looking through the papers, Brucey lied. There are complications with the transfer of the deed. Julian is being aggressive, but technically, since I was a dependent during the foreclosure notice period, I might have the power to halt the eviction for 30 days. Yes, Beatrice said breathlessly. Yes, of course you do. I've been saying that. You owe us that much after all we did for you. I'm willing to sign a waiver, Brucey said. I'll let you back in the house. We can work out a payment plan for the trust money you spent. I don't want to see you on the street, Beatrice. You're the only mother I've known. Beatrice smirked. Hook, line, and sinker. The girl was too soft. Too stupid. You're a good girl, Brucey, Beatrice crooned. I always knew you had a good heart despite your flaws. We'll come over right now. We can sign the papers tonight. Come to the study, Brucey said. Come alone. Just you and Tiffany. Leave the car at the gate so Julian's security doesn't see you. We'll be there in 20 minutes, Beatrice said and hung up. She turned to Tiffany. Get up. Fix your face. We're going back. Once I'm back inside, I'll find where she keeps that deed, and I'll burn it. I'll make that girl wish she was never born. 30 minutes later, the service door to the mansion creaked open. Beatrice and Tiffany crept into the hallway. They were wet again, their shoes muddy, but Beatrice held her head high. They made their way to the study. The door was ajar. Beatrice pushed it open. Brucey, we're here. Do you have the waiver? Brucey was sitting behind the massive oak desk. She was wearing a dry, crisp white blouse and black trousers, one of Beatrice's own suits that she had taken from the master closet. She looked powerful. Julian was nowhere to be seen. Sit down, Brucey said, gesturing to the two chairs opposite the desk. Don't take that tone with me. Beatrice snapped her confidence, returning now that she was on home turf. Where is the paper? Let's get this over with so I can go to sleep. And tomorrow you're going to clean up that mess in the foyer. Brucey didn't move. She just stared at Beatrice. Did you think about them? Think about who? Beatrice scoffed. My parents, Brucey said. Did you think about them when you spent their money? Did you think about them when you looked at me? Beatrice stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. It was a tragedy. I took you in. Stop lying, Brucey said, her voice rising. She slapped the yellow folder onto the desk. I know about the brakes, Beatrice. I know about the mechanic. Gus Miller. The colour drained from Beatrice's face so completely she looked like a wax figure. Tiffany looked confused. Mum, who is Gus Miller? Shut up, Tiffany, Beatrice hissed. She looked at the folder, then at Brucey. Her eyes darted around the room. You can't prove anything. That was 15 years ago. The statute of limitations. There is no statute of limitations on murder, Brucey said. And it's not just murder. It's corporate manslaughter, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Beatrice lunged. She wasn't a young woman, but desperation gave her speed. She threw herself across the desk, grabbing for the folder. Give me that. You ungrateful little bitch, I'll kill you. Brucey didn't flinch. She didn't have to. From the shadows of the corner, Julian stepped out. But he wasn't alone. 3 uniformed police officers and a man in a trench coat, Detective Miller, no relation to the mechanic, stepped out from the connecting library door. Beatrice Thornton, the detective said, his hand resting on his holster. Step away from the desk. Beatrice froze. She looked at the cops, then at Brucey. You set me up. I just invited you home, Brucey said coldly. You're the one who confessed. I didn't confess, Beatrice screamed. I said nothing. We've been recording since you walked in the door, Julian said, pointing to a small red light blinking on the bookshelf. And we have the wire transfers. We have the original fleet logs. It's over, Beatrice. The officers moved in. Beatrice fought, scratching and screaming as they cuffed her hands behind her back. Tiffany began to scream. I didn't do it. I didn't know. Don't arrest me. Tiffany Thornton, the detective said. You are under arrest for being an accomplice to fraud and beneficiary of stolen funds. You signed the documents. Mum told me to, Tiffany cried, as an officer cuffed her. Brucey watched them being dragged out. Beatrice looked back one last time, her eyes filled with pure hatred. You're nothing without me, Beatrice screamed. You're a stray, no one wants you. Brucey stood up. She walked around the desk and stood right in front of Beatrice. I'm Brucey Vance, she said clearly. Daughter of Marcus and Sarah Vance. I am the owner of this house. I am the owner of the patent you stole. And you are just an inmate." The police dragged them out. The front door slammed shut. The silence returned to the house, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt clean. Julian walked over to Brucey. She was trembling again, but he wrapped his arms around her. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "It's done." "They're gone," Brucey breathed, leaning into him. "It's actually over." "Not quite," Julian said, pulling back slightly to look at her. "There's one more thing. I promised you a twist, didn't I?" "A twist?" Brucey asked, confused. What more could there be? Julian smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "The patent, your father's stabilizer valve. Beatrice thought she suppressed it, but she was incompetent." "What do you mean?" "When Sterling Global bought the debt on this house, we also did a deep dive into Thornton Industries' archives," Julian explained. "The patent wasn't just sitting there, it was active. But because they never used it, and they never paid the renewal fees properly, it entered the public domain. Or it would have if a certain anonymous benefactor hadn't stepped in 5 years ago to pay the fees and hold it in trust for the rightful heir." Brucey stared at him. No. Julian shook his head. "Not me. I only found out today. It was someone else. Someone who has been watching you for a long time, waiting for you to be free of Beatrice." The library door opened again. An older man walked in. He leaned on a cane, wearing a modest suit. He had kind eyes that looked shockingly familiar. Brucey gasped. Uncle Joe." It was the gardener, the old man who had worked on the Thornton grounds for as long as Brucey could remember, the one who used to sneak her apples when Beatrice sent her to bed without dinner, the one Beatrice treated like dirt. "Hello, Brucey," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't understand," Brucey stammered. "Brucey, I'm not a gardener, Brucey," Joe said softly. "My name is Joseph Vance. I'm your father's brother." The flashing lights of the police cruisers faded against the library windows, leaving the room in a heavy, sudden silence. Brucey stood paralyzed, staring at the empty space where her tormentors had stood. The nightmare was over, yet she felt a strange hollowness. "It's finally done," Julian said softly, stepping toward her. "Is it?" Brucey whispered. "They're gone, but I'm still here, in this house, alone." "You are not alone, Brucey." The voice came from the shadows. The library door creaked open, and the old gardener, old Joe, stepped into the light. He wasn't wearing his usual muddy overalls. He wore a modest, clean suit. He stood tall, the stoop of a servant gone. Brucey gasped. "Joe, what are you doing inside?" "My name isn't Joe the gardener," the old man said, his eyes watering. "It's Joseph Vance. I'm your father's brother. I'm your Uncle Brucey." Brucey felt the room spin. "My uncle, but Beatrice said." "Beatrice lied." Joseph cut in, walking forward to take her hands. "When they killed your father, I was just an engineer. I had no money, no power. If I had fought for custody, Beatrice would have buried me and sent you away. So I took the job as the groundskeeper. I stayed close to watch over you, waiting for the day we could prove what she did." Brucey collapsed into his arms, sobbing. For 15 years, the family she craved had been raking leaves right outside her window. "I have one more surprise," Joseph said, pulling back and placing a flash drive on the desk. "Beatrice was too arrogant to understand your father's work. She let the patent for his stabilizer valve lapse into the public domain 5 years ago. She thought it was worthless." Joseph smiled at Julian. "I didn't. I formed a holding company, Vance Technologies, and reclaimed the rights. We license that valve to every major oil rig in the world. Julian looked stunned. You're the CEO of Vance Tech. I tried to acquire your firm last year for $400 million. You turned me down. I turned you down because it wasn't mine to sell, Joseph said, squeezing Brucey's hand. It belongs to Brucey. You aren't just an heiress to a trust fund, my dear. You are a self-made tycoon. The money has been waiting for you. Brucey looked at the flash drive, then at the opulent room around her. She realized she didn't need the Thorntons, and she certainly didn't need their house. I don't want this place, Brucey said firmly. It's poisoned. Julian, sell it. Bulldoze it. Use the money to start a legal fund for foster kids. Done, Julian smiled. Joseph tactfully tapped his cane. I'll give you two a moment. He winked and slipped out of the room. Julian turned to Brucey. The storm outside had broken, and moonlight filled the room. I had a speech planned, Julian said, reaching into his pocket. But I realized something tonight. I didn't fall in love with the heiress. I fell in love with the girl who offered a stranger half her sandwich. He dropped to one knee, revealing a vintage emerald ring. Brucey Vance, will you marry me? Yes, Brucey whispered, pulling him up for a kiss. Yes. 6 months later, the cameras flashed as Brucey walked down the courthouse steps, looking radiant in a cream suit. Beatrice had been sentenced to life, Tiffany to 5 years. Mrs. Sterling, a reporter shouted. What about the mansion? It's gone, Brucey said into the microphone. The land is now the Marcus and Sarah Vance public park. No gates, just open space. She took Julian's hand and they walked to the curb. Waiting for them wasn't a limo, but the restored 1998 Ford F-150. As they drove away, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, the road ahead was wide open. Brucey's story proves that while lies may sprint, the truth runs a marathon. Beatrice thought status gave her the right to be cruel, but she learned that character is the only currency that matters. The Thorntons built a life on sand and blood, and it collapsed. Brucey built hers on resilience and love, and she ended up with the kingdom. Never judge a book by its cover, and never judge a man by the truck he drives. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so much. What would you do if you found out you were a secret millionaire? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories, and thanks for watching.